Can everyone hear me good? Is everyone able to hear me?
Loud and clear, Laura.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So today I would like to welcome each and every one of you to the Preemption 101 and why it's important for Prenatal-to-3 advocates. I'm Laura Coleman, the Media Relations Manager for Voices for Healthy Kids. I provide technical assistance and support to campaigns in the field on media advocacy, and I look forward to meeting each and every one of you on this call if I haven't met you yet. And I am joining you currently from Jackson, Mississippi. So if there are any Southerners here, I want to send a warm welcome. All right, so we want to get some house rules going on, some housekeeping rules. So today's call is being recorded. I'm sure some of you heard that we've already began that process. We will be sharing the recording slides and reference tools and any of the resources that we provide after this call. If you need any assistance during this call, please message tech support in the chat. You can see it says tech support, so just message them personally. We will have a question and answer session, but please put your questions in the chat box during the session as they come up so we can address them. If we don't get to all the questions or don't have the answer, we will follow up after the call. Also, keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking to allow others to be able to hear whomever is speaking. And at the end of this session, we will share a brief survey. We ask you all to take just 2 minutes out of your day to complete. We will even try to end 2 minutes early if we can, so you have time on this call to fill out the survey. We really do take your feedback seriously, and it will help us to make this series and all of our offerings much better. Please take a moment, if you hadn't already, and introduce yourselves in the chat box with your name, your organization, and your location. All right, and I just again want to say a warm welcome to everybody. So right now, if you're just joining us, drop your name, your organization, and your location. So I see some people from California, I see Cincinnati and Colorado. All right, Pennsylvania. I see some people from Seattle, Dallas, Texas. All right, so make sure you drop your information in the chat box. Today, we're going to review what preemption is and the risk harmful preemption poses to the Prenatal-to-3 advocates. We will look at the current state of preemption legislation, hear from an amazing advocate from Florida. We will also have time for our question and answer session to review all tools and resources available. But first, I want to give the team a chance to introduce themselves at this moment.
I think I'm first. Good afternoon, everyone. Christine Compton. I'm a National Senior Advocacy Consultant with the Voices for Healthy Kids team, the American Heart Association, and I specifically work on preemption policy. So I will be given that overview later today, and I'll let my colleague Sarah introduce herself next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Mann. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst here on the Voices for Healthy Kids team, and I'm based in Boulder, Colorado. I'll hand it over to Ida.
Hi, y'all. It's great to join you today. My name is Ida Escamani. My pronouns she, her, hers. I am coming at you from Orlando, Florida. So solidarity with our Southerners. I totally feel that. And I am currently a State Innovation Exchange Senior Director of Legislative Affairs, and I've worked in the Florida legislature for the past 6 or 7 years now, and I'm born and raised in Orlando, Florida. And Lori, it's great to see you in the chat.
Thanks, Ida. Hi, all. I'm Ali Rahimi. I am the National Grassroots Manager Digital for Voices for Healthy Kids, coming at you today from sunny Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, thanks again to our, did everyone go? I'm sorry. Did I hear someone? Okay. I thought I heard someone. But again, thanks to our amazing team for joining us today. I'm so excited to kick this off. And we will first go to Christine for our Preemption 101 and overview.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, so let's talk about what is preemption. It's kind of a big word. Next slide, there we go. It's kind of a big word that we really try not to use very broadly. It's pretty policy wonky, and it can sound a bit like using industry-specific acronyms. So what does it mean? Historically, preemption was a neutral policy tool used to avoid conflict with regulations at different levels of government. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because having multiple sets of rules can make things difficult or confusing, and may be impossible if you can't operate within those conflicting laws. So initially, it seemed like preemption was maybe a method to avoid confusion. So by definition, preemption is when legislative or regulatory action from a higher level of government that eliminates or reduces the authority of a lower level of government regarding a certain issue. So not all preemption is bad. That's one thing we really want to stress. Preemption in and of itself is actually a neutral policy tool used to avoid conflicting laws that, like I said, would make it difficult or impossible to operate within. One example of neutral preemptive standards is the federal prohibition of smoking on airplanes, which allows airplanes to cross state borders without the impossible burden of complying with different state laws around tobacco use. As well, federal and state governments use something called floor preemption, which I'll talk more about in a moment, to establish minimum standards and allow local governments to go beyond that. Examples of floor preemption are things like the Federal Minimum Wage Act and the Federal Civil Rights Act. So historically, the use of preemption and how it's applied originates in the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, which grants federal government broad preemptive authority over states and local governments. This allows states to preempt local governments as well. So that clause, I won't read it to you verbatim, but that is it in the Constitution, the Supremacy Clause. So recently, however, there's been a shift from that neutral policy tool to increasingly common legislative tactics that remove the regulatory power of local governments across a variety of issues, while also limiting the average person's ability to participate in our democracy. So there's been this shift to ceiling preemption that prevents local governments from passing or enacting laws that require more stringent standards than higher levels of government. Preemption is starting to be used in aggressive ways in different political and social contexts. We are starting to see a barrage of something called vacuum preemption, also where higher levels of government purposely do not regulate a particular topic, but they also preempt local authorities from doing so, therefore creating a regulatory vacuum and leaving the issue completely unregulated. This happens a lot in industries, chemical industry, energy industry, that type of thing. But there's also ceiling preemption, and typically that's where we see the issue. So ceiling preemption, again, it caps local power and prevents lower levels of government from regulating certain issues. Ceiling preemption isn't inherently bad by itself, but it can be used to stop discriminatory state and local laws that drive racial inequities. For example, a state preemptive law that prevents local discriminatory zoning policies could actually be considered a good thing. However, with vacuum and ceiling preemption, especially when there's punitive penalties included, such as fining local governments that try to regulate certain products or allowing certain protections or preventing them, in other words, harmful preemption, this is where we have concerns for equity. When local levels of government are prevented from addressing specific issues that impact their citizens and affect their ability to govern and have power over their citizens and communities. So what's driving this change? Special interest groups are using their significant resources to make sure their interests and bottom lines are protected. By supporting the consolidation of power at the state level and effectively stopping local policy innovation. We're in a time where corporations are considered individuals and can bring significant resources to the table to ensure their profits and bottom lines are protected. The American Heart Association and Voices for Healthy Kids support science-based policies at all levels of government, and we recognize the importance of local policymaking to promote and protect public health and advance health equity. And we believe in protecting local government power and the democratic process from state and federal overreach. Next slide, Yui. So corporate influence, what's happening here? Driven by corporations, trade associations, special interest groups, preemptive laws are getting enacted by state and federal levels that are weaker than bills being proposed at more local levels of government, enabling industry to avoid stringent regulations and ensure that industry must only comply with one set of laws rather than different laws across the country. Preemption of lower levels of government are typically not necessary and frequently can be misused to support the interest of powerful industries. So again, the issue isn't preemption itself, but rather the gross misuse of preemption. The recent wide sweeping shift to ceiling preemption that prevents local governments from passing or enacting laws that require more stringent standards than higher levels of government, simply with the goal of deregulating an issue. We saw this recently with the train wreck in East Palestine, Ohio, that was done at the federal level, where things were not put into place to make more stringent regulations on trains. And as a result, there was an accident and now there's cleanup issues. So preemption is being used in aggressive ways in different political and social contexts and pushed by special interest groups. Supporters of deregulation work to bypass local governments and consolidate power at the state level use their vast resources to lobby just a few state legislators instead of reaching individual policymakers at a local level. And so they use the argument, that's why there's a picture of a quilt on this slide, that they say that there's a patchwork of regulations and it's just difficult to navigate. And so, but what we find on the other side here is that research really finds little evidence that these varied local laws harm businesses or consumers. And in fact, when proponents of preemption are pushed to provide examples of the supposed harms of local laws or these patchwork of confusing laws, the arguments often are really against any regulation, not just the patchwork of local laws. So what is preemption's impact? So we know that it can remove the opportunity for local governments to take control and take action. It can overturn elections. It can create disproportionate effects, and it can suppress democracy. So preemption strips many people of their ability to meaningfully engage with their local elected officials. The most accessible level of government, after all, is the local government. If you think about it, maybe you go to church with your congressperson or your, or not your congressperson, but your council person. Maybe you live in a neighborhood with the mayor. Maybe you run into the local school board president at the grocery store, or your kids go to school together. So, you know, the local government is the most accessible to the people. And when that ability is restricted, then people are further removed from that. We've also seen a recent trend of overturning ballot measures. So really people's democracy and their voice in that democracy is being silenced. So unnecessarily limiting local control and blocking policies promoting health and equity has severe and preventable consequences. Consequences can be significant and too often disproportionately affect women, people of color, and communities with high rates of poverty. Preemption most disproportionately affects women, people of color, low-wage workers, and people who are less likely represented in government. For example, nationwide, African Americans make up about 13% of the population, but only 9% of state legislatures. Latinx, Latino, Latina, about 15% of the population, but only 5% of state legislatures. And AAIP, Asian American Pacific Islanders, are about 5% of the population, but less than 1% in state legislatures. Conversely, at the local level, there's stronger representation of women and minorities in all elected positions. Research that shows that local elections, voters tend to select people who look like them and have similar life experiences. So it's really important that the local elected officials are able to take action on issues that affect their constituents and in their communities. In order to address these inequities, we need to make sure that economics, political connections, self-perpetuation, and a lack of minority representation is not negatively impacting the communities we live in. The best way to do that is to fight back against harmful preemption. Preemption's impact also can have sweeping state laws that prohibit efforts to address local issues. There's punitive penalties that I mentioned that can happen. Overturning local elections, we've started to see that. actually harming communities, if we're talking about a public health or safety issue, in obstructing those public health and safety issues. So we saw this a lot, especially during the height of the pandemic with overturning of mask mandates. We're also seeing it in the public school space where there's a rolling back or changing of vaccine mandates, for example, and then also on restrictions about curriculums. So we're starting to see state governments even threaten to withhold funds from cities and punishing local officials that pass these policies and defy state orders. These types of ceiling preemptions have real impact on local communities when power is stripped away. State preempts local control. So I know that was a lot of information. I hope I didn't talk too fast, but we're not done yet. Next, we're going to transition to looking at some issues that are being preempted across the country that might impact prenatal-to-3 policies. In some places, state governments are passing laws to prevent local governments from being able to put policies in place that help young families thrive. Examples of those are listed here: paid family leave and medical leave, minimum wage, sick days, pregnancy, employment discrimination, fair scheduling, tobacco and sugary drink taxes that could fund early child care and other programs, healthy restaurant meals, and smoke-free designations. So I'm going to hand this off now to my very bright colleague, Sarah, who's going to go into more detail about the state of preemption legislation.
Thank you, Christine. As Christine just went over, there are many issues impacting the prenatal-to-3 space that are subject to preemption. Many of these important issues are already preempted around the country. As you can see the numbers on the slides, many of the states that have preempted these issues that are important policies have also unfortunately created a vacuum. They are stopping these local governments from passing policies that may help families thrive while also not properly addressing the issues at the state level. This is the work that we are trying to correct. Next slide. So preemption stands in the way of paid leave for new and growing families, equitable employment practices, creating safe and healthy environments for children and families, and funding early care and other programs that are important to young, thriving families. These policies have the potential to really impact a child's health and development and the overall well-being of families. As many as 23% of employed birthing parents return to work within 10 days of giving birth because of an inability to pay for living expenses without income. Ensuring paid leave is available to new and growing families provides economic security and peace of mind to parents. Paid family and medical leave has been linked to many healthy benefits, including fewer low birth weight babies, fewer ER visits, fewer hospital readmissions for infants and mothers, higher rates of breastfeeding, and improved mental health. Equitable employment practices provide families with stability and economic security, which can reduce stress and support overall welfare for the families. Unpredictable work schedules are associated with greater economic insecurity, increases in hunger and residential hardships, less time for parents to engage in activities with children, diminished parental well-being. These problems can be addressed through fair scheduling practices. And a minimum wage rate that meets the economic realities of specific locations is important. A study assessing how preemption affects birth outcomes found that state preemption on local minimum wage laws accounted for as many as 3.5% of infant deaths, resulting in more than 600 infant deaths in 2018 alone. The largest metro counties could reduce the infant mortality rate by 1.5 to 1.8% by increasing the minimum wage by $1 to better meet the needs of their citizens. Requiring employers to provide paid sick days is another area often preempted by state law. When a worker without paid sick leave must miss work because of their own illness or to care for a loved one, a half day of lost wages is equivalent to the household's monthly spending for fruits and vegetables. 2 days of lost wages equates to a month's worth of gas. 3 days is equal to a monthly utility payment or their entire grocery budget. And roughly a week of lost wages equals an entire month's rent or mortgage payment. That demonstrates why not having paid sick days can severely impact the economic well-being of a family. Preemption can also impact a locality's ability to create a safe and healthy environment for kids and families. 85% of US households eat out on average about 5 times a week, and nearly 1/3 of the calories kids consume come from unhealthy fats and added sugars in fast food. Nevertheless, some states limit the ability to set standards that nudge families to consume healthier meals and drinks. Also, despite the well-known risks associated with tobacco use and secondhand smoke, over 30 states restrict local tobacco control measures. Babies and young children exposed to secondhand smoke are more likely to have sudden infant death syndrome, low birth weight, weak lungs, asthma, chronic lung problems, ear infections, and more sick days. Preemption also extends to local taxing power. Tobacco taxes and sugary drink taxes can provide revenue streams to local governments to fund important programs that support families, like early care and education and SNAP incentive programs. As you can see, preemption can have a real and lasting impact on a family's health and overall well-being. We know that healthy families lead to healthy babies, infants, and toddlers, which is why the well-being of the family can't be separated from the child, and why support for children, parents, and childcare providers matters. Local governments need to be able to support their communities through tailored policy change at the local level. Next slide. This is why we really need to be pushing back against harmful preemption, and why we are working to monitor the state of preemption across the country. We are tracking legislation across all 50 states. We are currently monitoring over 50 preemption bills that relate to public health. There are, unfortunately, hundreds of other preemption bills on other topics making their way through state houses across the country this legislative session. This tracking is important work because it allows us to monitor trends, engage advocates and grassroots supporters, and provide technical assistance when needed to address these issues. So now Christine and I have provided you a lot of information about the nuts and bolts of preemption. But what I'm really excited to do now is turn it over to Ida, who can provide a firsthand account of her work on the ground in Florida, fighting harmful preemption, and how critical that work is to making sure all pregnant people, babies, toddlers, and their families can thrive. Ida, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. It's great to share the Zoom room with you, and what an awesome overview of the harms of preemption and the corporate influence and the overall threats we find in our democracy as we centralize power into the hands of the few with influence and how it impacts our families. So my name is Ida. I'm coming to you from Orlando, Florida. I spent the last 6 years working on the ground in the Florida legislature, and I am very proud to have founded our multi-issue Preemption Coalition. We call ourselves the Defenders of Local Democracy, and the American Heart Association and a lot of public health advocates are really amazing partners of ours in this work. And so I'll speak super briefly just about how we have faced some of these fights on the ground and sort of the impact on kids and infants and pregnant folks that preemption has. And preemption is often influencing you and you just don't know it. And so a lot of times when we talk about preemption, we sort of use issues as gateways for folks. So if you're passionate about housing, let's talk about how preemption and abusive preemption has impacted housing justice in your state. If you care about public health, we can talk about that. If you care about workers, let's talk about that. The environment, the list goes on and on and on. And of course, it's always the most marginalized communities. And that is Black and brown folks and low income folks and their families and children that are most impacted on all of these different fights. And so when we talk about preemption being a neutral tool, that is so absolutely true. There's a lot of good preemptions that we see, statewide protections for our communities, just different basic health and public health and safety standards, right? Things that we as communities can build up on, but don't prevent us from doing the things that we need to keep our communities safe and prosperous. And so when here in Florida, we've got a lot of different preemption fights. And my first introduction to preemption was actually when I was in college, and I was part of a local grassroots effort to get paid sick leave on the ballot in my county. And it was the first of its kind in the state. And I helped collect petitions for it at the local level to get it on the ballot, to get it passed. And as we were on the cusp of passing this, the tourism industry, theme parks, Disney, and these other big players swept in. Not only did they slow down the local implementation through litigation, trying to get it off the ballot, But then before we even voted on it at the local level, they went to the state capitol and they passed a statewide preemption, a statewide mandate prohibiting any local government to pass earned sick time in the state. And now 10 years later, we're actually in a very similar fight around rent control here in Florida. Here in Orange County, I was a part of this effort too. We got Orange County to put rent control on the ballot, only to stop rent hikes lined up with inflation. So you can't do more than 10%, 11% hike rates, rent hikes, excuse me. And again, the corporations, the Florida Real Estate Association, the Landlord Association, the Apartment Association, which is backed by some multinational companies and private equity firms that hide behind these sort of trade association logos, swept in and sued the local level to prevent it from coming on the ballot, which they failed, and it passed on the ballot, but they are currently working to pass a statewide preemption on that as well. So, and when it comes to the impact of these various things on kids, there's a lot of research to show too that, for example, minimum wage preemption, so blocking local governments and raising the minimum wage, is directly connected to infant mortality rates. You see more and more studies around how sick leave and paid family leave is directly connected to infant mortality rates because parents can't take time off to take care of their sick kids. When you look at living wages, again, this is making sure families have what they need to succeed. I spoke about housing and rent control and all these different preemptions that developers pass. Tobacco and smoking, especially kids with asthma, and pollution for kids in low-income communities where you see various waste management and other toxic chemicals right in their backyards, right? And preemption preventing local governments from protecting those communities. We see preemption in school boards, in curriculum, in targeting certain kids that are different. Partisan school board races is another sort of trend we're seeing to impact the education kids get and inserting politics into our kids' schooling. We've seen public health around vaccinations and more preemptions starting to get introduced that would prohibit basic forms of vaccinations that we all know and use in our public schools that would prohibit those being required. We had heard references around local and direct democracy. So ballot initiatives, it's a lot of the same corporate players that are undermining our local freedoms are also working to undermine our democracy in general, because again, it's all about centralizing power in the hands of the few in the state legislature so they can make more profits at the expense of our public health and our safety and our well-being. And we've seen just a lot of these different assaults that disproportionately impact low-income, working-class communities and communities of color. And it's always children that are the folks most impacted, right? Who don't get to have a say necessarily in these processes, but inherit the system. And the work that we've done in Florida, we sort of, as we tackle these bills, we approach it from an intersectional lens in the sense of embracing our solidarity. Our coalition has public health advocates, worker organizations, environmental organizations, different civil rights groups, some unlikely allies as well, right? We look at rural communities and other communities that are also impacted, and we have a shared understanding that we all have a right to local democracy, that we all have a right to create communities that serve the needs that we have as communities. And a lot of times we don't even look at, we don't put our power in local government officials because a lot of the same corporate actors are also influencing at the local level. It's really about the power of people and the power of families and parents and kids to create communities that serve our needs. And as we have fought these pieces, I'll give a few quick case studies because I could go on and on as y'all can hear. But last session, we had some really big fights and we were able to defeat bills, including getting the governor to veto a massive preemption bill, which to us is a huge win because a lot of folks look at Governor DeSantis as somebody that you can't, influence, but we were able to force a veto on a massive preemption bill. The bill would have allowed governments, it would have allowed corporations to sue local governments if any local law impacted 15% of their revenue. So basically, you couldn't put profits over people more clearly in a bill, and it would have handed over our local governments to the courts and to corporations and corporate lawyers. And basically, not only would it have prevented countless local policies that are really beneficial to our communities and to our families, but it also would have chilled our local governments are doing anything on anything because they could have just cite the threat of litigation. And so we defeated this bill by doing a few different pieces. We built together a broad coalition that included public health advocates, animal rights advocates, worker advocates, any type of local policy that was impacted. We were together fighting this bill in solidarity, but also being strategic about reaching out to our main audiences, right? And mobilizing our base around a unifying message. And so we center directly impacted people in all the different ways when it comes to testimony, to organizing, to press, media engagement, press releases, op-eds, sign-on letters, all the different grassroots efforts. But we also follow the money, and we also expose the corporate greed behind these bills. Because what we have found in Florida is that a lot of our elected officials are pretty okay about certain name calling. They want to be anti-immigrant, they want to be anti-LGBTQ, they want to be some of these things, sadly, in my opinion, but nonetheless, they're okay with it. They don't want to be bought out by a big corporate actor. That's the unifying theme that all Floridians oppose. They want you to serve us, the people, not corporate interests or out of touch special interests, right? And so when we follow the money on some of these pieces around connecting the lobbyist registration to the bill, to the sponsor, and really paint that picture for folks around this is who your elected official is serving. It's not you, it's actually this like profit, entity, this for-profit entity, that really gets Floridians engaged, and they want to and engage in the process and wanting to demand that their elected officials, regardless of their party, serve people over profits, right? And so we sort of center most impacted people and the unique experiences while also exposing the corporate greed behind these fights. And we stopped two massive, just universal Death Star preemption bills last year that would have disproportionately impacted issues like pollution regulation, worker protections, living wages in Florida, wage theft protections, things that really serve low-income working class families and their kids were all at risk from these bills that we were able to defeat. We also defeated a preemption bill that explicitly would have slashed the wages of public contract workers. And this includes airport workers, custodians, basically private workers that work for a public contractor that might get paid, 15, 17 bucks an hour versus $10 an hour. They would have seen their wages slashed from 17 to 10 bucks an hour if this bill had passed. And we were able to defeat it by, again, centering people impacted, but by also doing some really strong opposition research and figuring out the different corporate players behind the bill. And so I could go on and on and on, right? But so many of these bills, again, are designed to centralize the power of the few over all of us and disproportionately impact our most vulnerable communities. And that is always children, of course. And we see time and time again, more and more research connecting these abusive preemption bills to the mortality rates of infants and to this economic success of families. And so ultimately, these are economic justice issues and they're public health issues, and they sit in the intersection of so much. And if you don't know what preemption is, preemption is probably impacting you even if you don't know it, because anything that takes away power from local communities is a preemption bill. And it's this really nefarious tool that our opponents have used to their advantage because it's so wonky and weird. So I'm really excited to see more advocates talking about preemption and wanting to target it effectively and stop the abuse, because once we sort of like pull the curtains, everyone agrees that local communities should be able to pass local laws that fit their needs, and that power should be in the hands of the people, not corporate interests. So I'm always happy to answer questions and talk more about like inside baseball. There are a lot of preemption bills coming down the pipe this current legislative session. Session in Florida officially starts next week. We're seeing some really wild preemption bills. Some of the ones we defeated have been refiled, but we also just saw a bill yesterday that would basically prohibit all water quality regulation at the local level, including regulating pollution. And in the wake of East Palestine, it's really horrifying to see that preemption drop yesterday. And so the first thing we're doing, right, is mobilizing different partners to educate on the bill and to prepare to fight the bill, but we're also digging into who's behind this bill and figuring out and exposing those corporate actors, because it's pretty clear it's some sort of corporate polluter that basically wants to get away with polluting our air and water. And as we've seen historically with redlining and other racist laws that are ingrained in our systems, it's always low income and communities of color that lay in these sort of areas that get most directly impacted by toxic chemicals and air pollution and all the like, right? And so, yeah, Laura, I can pop it in the chat. So it's in Florida, but basically it would prohibit local governments from doing any water quality regulation, and explicitly says polluters. And it just feels like after the train derailment, it seems pretty wild that all of a sudden this bill would be dropping in Florida that would basically protect polluters from any accountability at the local level. And so I'll pop it in the chat so folks can see. So I am happy to take questions, but I will toss it back to our host. I'm just very grateful for the space to share some of the things we're facing in Florida, and also recognizing that things are coming up from Florida, up across the rest of the country. And so we know that the fights that happen in Florida impact the rest of the nation as well. And so just know that our team here is doing the work. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Ida. As always, that was very informative and eye-opening. And thank you to all the presenters who provided great content today. So we do have some time for questions and answers. Please feel free to add your questions to the chat. If you know how to use the raise hand function in Zoom, go ahead and use that as well, or just take yourself off mute. We will try to get through as many as we can. If we do run out of time, we will take questions via email and hopefully get you an answer soon on that. So again, feel free to pop any questions in the chat or just come off mute.
I have a question. If people are interested in figuring out if there's preemption being filed in their states, what's a way that they could do that?
Thanks for that question, Allison. If people are interested in what's happening in their state specifically, they are welcome to reach out to us, and we're happy to let them know what preemptive bills we may be tracking in their state, or help do a search if that's something they'd like to dig into further. That aligns with some of the technical assistance that we can offer on this issue here at the Voices for Healthy Kids team.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions?
I'll just echo how great a resource the American Heart Association team is, and Local Solution Support Center is another great partner as well. So there's a lot of great folks tracking these bills, and your state might have a coalition. If not, we should talk about starting one, right? We founded the Florida Defenders Local Democracy Coalition that's very, very much centered on defending local freedoms at the state level. And it's multi-issued partners, and we basically track and organize around these bills throughout session. So it's a really great space of information sharing, intel sharing, aligning strategy. And I know more and more states are advocates are forming these type of coalitions because what our opponents often do is divide and conquer us. And if we're not looking at things with a unifying thread, we will lose. And so coming together in solidarity is a really critical tool that counters, what our opponents are trying to do to us. I'll give another, quick example. This bill is going to be introduced soon in Florida. It's a massive anti-immigrant bill, and it includes preemption around community IDs, which has been a really amazing local effort supported by law enforcement to issue nonprofit IDs for undocumented people, which of course for the parents of undocumented kids is huge. And they want to end these programs that are happening around the state. And so not only is that an immigrant issue, but that bill has also been added to the tracker of the Preemption Coalition. And for those partners who are able to, they'll be opposing the bill, not even from like an immigrant perspective necessarily, but from a basic local freedoms perspective around, I'm not an immigrant advocate, but I do stand for local democracy. And as an advocate for local communities, I have to oppose this bill because you're telling local governments and local people what they can and cannot do. So, there's a frame of solidarity there, which is why preemption is such a really incredible opportunity, because it brings so many different advocates together to align our strategy And it's rooted fundamentally in like protecting a foundational value of democracy in this country that, coming from Florida, I feel is like slipping away. And so we, we're fighting it fiercely. But we can center people impacted and stand in solidarity together. So a lot of beauty in the Preemption Coalition spaces.
Thanks, Ida. We do have a question in the chat. Letitia is asking, wondering how cannabis tax could be considered to early childhood or successful stories where it has been done.
So we haven't really looked into the cannabis taxes at a deep level quite yet. A lot of the preemptive bills that limit local taxing authority would likely also extend to cannabis tax. So that's why it can have a far-reaching effect. Some of the preemption bills we see will specifically prohibit a tobacco tax or a sugary drink tax, but some of them restrict local taxing authority very broadly, and that would impact things like cannabis taxes as well, again, cutting off another revenue stream for local governments. We are currently working with some partners to develop some more information around different types of local taxes that could be pursued to support early childhood programs and other programs that support families. And once we have that information available, I'm sure we'll be pushing it out to the NCIT.
Thanks, Sarah. One more call for questions. Again, feel free to raise your hand, just come off mute or put it in the chat. And if there's nothing, I will toss it back to Laura Coleman.
All right, thanks, Ali. And thank you to everyone that participated today. I'm sorry. That was such a great session. We hope that you got a great deal from today's session. And even though I am going kind of wrapping things up, if you do come up with a question, still put it in the chat below. But yeah, we hope that you learned a great deal today in our session and that you plan on joining us for the 2 remaining sessions in this series. Please invite others as well to join us whom you think would benefit from this series. The next session will be held on March the 21st, when we will dive into the research, science, and data around the dangers of abusive preemption. And remember, if you need assistance in your campaign, please visit our technical assistance portal, and we will be in touch very soon. Now we'll go to the slide with our survey that we mentioned earlier, that it will just take about 2 minutes to do at the beginning of the call. I'm hopeful you all will take time to fill it out now, as the information you provide is critical for us to deliver the best trainings possible. So if you could please scan and fill that survey out. But again, I thank you all for joining us today, and please reach out if we can offer any additional assistance. Great, thanks everybody. You can scan the QR code for that link.